I'm Dr. Gavin Schwartz-Leeper. I'm the Director of Student Experience for Liberal Arts at the University of Warwick. The module I've taught this past year is for our first year's Art and Revolution, IP 103 for Liberal Arts. All of the case studies we work with, all of the content we work with is focused on generating complex problems. So the students are always thinking about the ways in which they can bring their own skills and interests into that messy problem. So even if it is something that appears, at first glance to not be up their alley, there is always an opportunity for them to bring something they're interested in into that conversation. Well, I think one of the great things about this module is that actually the students have reported enjoying the assessments, which I think is a first in my experience. It's something that Katya Jananati and I worked closely to develop, was that we thought we want these assessments to be productive, we want them to be authentic, we want the students to be able to look back at them, and at the feedback of course, and say, if when they're applying for jobs or for graduate school, whatever it is, that these assessments, one, they understood why we set them in the first place, and that wasn't just about testing content knowledge, that was also about seeing the ways in which they can frame problems in a variety of different ways. But also for the students that they should be able to see the real practical skills that they've been developing as a result of that. How do you present information in one format, and how does that change when you transfer that to another format? When you're thinking about audience, who are you speaking to in these assessments, and for what purpose are you, where are you trying to get them? That's been really key, I think, for our assessment strategy. In terms of the assessments themselves, we wanted to make sure that the students had freedom to fail, essentially. We wanted to make sure that this wasn't just one exam right at the end of the year, 100%, the students get really stressed. Instead, we require 6 assessments over the course of the year. It's a 30-CAT module. And no single assessment is worth more than 30%. So even if a student completely fails one, they can actually still do quite well in terms of the overall module. Quite a lot of these are even smaller than that. They're only 10%. So they still matter. The students are still emotionally and invested. They have a reason to be engaging with these as hard as they can. But if they mess up, if they get it wrong, if they try something strange and it doesn't work out, that's okay. So for the 6 different assessments we have, the first 3 are object analyses. Object understood very loosely. So we have a film analysis, where of course the students look at a film and they learn how to talk about a film in a way that moves beyond mere sort of like and dislike. I think this is really important for the first years, where when they approach content, they think, this bores me, this excites me, I like this or I don't like this, I agree or I disagree. And instead we start thinking, okay, in a more critical way, how do you access what's happening in this film? What is the effect of the film? And the same goes for the second one, which is an image analysis. So it's usually a painting, but it could be a sculpture, it could be a photograph, any of that kind of still image. The final one is an archival analysis, and this one I really like because we get to use the Modern Record Center here at the University of Warwick, and Helen Ford at the MRC and her staff have been fantastic in showing them the storerooms, how the archive works, but also talking philosophically about the purpose of the archive, the emotional content that exists within the archive, as well as the resulting research opportunities that arise from that. So the students in that case prepare a report, fairly short, 1,500 words, where they move through a variety of different stages in the research process. So they learn how to search in the archives and start pulling out relevant materials. Some of it, of course, isn't relevant, and they learn how to cope with that. They learn how to adjust their expectations. They learn how to go through hundreds of dusty pages and how to stay focused. And over time, they come to refine their process so they come up with a really tight, original research question. And I think that even for students who aren't historians, who may not be interested in archival studies, that's been really profound, that they get to do something that no one else has done before, touching materials that no one has looked at in decades, centuries, whatever it might be. That's been really profound for them. For the final 3 assessments, the students do a number of slightly more traditional tasks, because we want them to see how the kinds of experiences they'll have elsewhere in their university careers, in postgraduate study, out in the rest of the world, in the professional world, how they all relate to these types of activities that are more familiar to them. So they'll do an extended critical essay, for example, they'll do an exam, but we talk to them and we prepare them to show the authenticity of those exercises. All of these assessments have really clear connections to the wider world, to the professional world in particular, so that when students go into job interviews, they're not struggling to think of why their experience was relevant. They have that answer ready right from the beginning, and they've been thinking about it for years at this point. One of the great examples, of course, is the group presentation. Now, we know that the group presentation is something that students dread. Frankly, I think a lot of professionals dread it too. It combines all the great fears of sort of speaking in public, surrendering control to other members of a group, people maybe you don't know that well, or that you don't trust enormously. You want to be able to control your own representations. And we force the students to surrender that in these group projects. But what we try to show the students is, one, this is a practical problem. They will confront this later in life, regardless of what they end up doing. But they can practice it in a safe environment. Because what we do, the way we structure our teaching is around problem-based learning, the students are used to group work, so they have already got to know their peers in a way that I don't think most students really get a chance to do. They don't just know them as people they go out and have fun with, but they learn about them, what their goals are intellectually and professionally. They learn about their preferred methods, their expertise, what those individual people can bring as thinkers and as producers to whatever that question is. So they're learning to think in that much more complex and productive, really productive way about how to achieve a particular goal. And I think when you combine that with the problem skills, the problem generation skills that they work on, especially in the first year, that's really quite powerful for the students. So one of the things I found really difficult is when a student has tried something really interesting, and especially in the more open assessments where we say, formulate a particular problem, you have to present it in this kind of way, but the question that you address itself is open. And the student, especially this is true for the first years, the student hasn't quite understood the parameters of the assessment. They've tried to do way too much or way too little, or they've gone off in a strange direction we hadn't anticipated, which is in some ways inevitable, right? They can do anything, they will do anything. And so on the one hand, you really have to leave that sense of control. You have to let go a little bit more, and I found that quite difficult because I believe fully in multidisciplinary engagement and drawing methodologies from all kinds of different places. But even so, of course, I have my own biases. I privilege what I think is important, and when the students depart from that, I can struggle to see how what they're doing is important. And then in terms of giving the feedback to the students, it's trying to engage in that authentic way and say, I see what you've done, or I haven't seen what you've done, and here's why that's a problem. The other thing is that, in liberal arts we're really privileged in that we have a lot of institutional buy-in. We have a lot of time to be giving individual feedback. Whereas in a more traditional department, with hundreds of students, all of them doing a lot of different assessments, that's a huge course load, that's a huge workload for the academics. So I can understand that could be a mounting problem very quickly in a larger group. I think continuity is really, really important. One of the great sadnesses, I think, of being a teacher in academia, I think this is a problem a lot of early career people have, right? You get your first batch of essays, you pour your heart out into these amazing comments, and nobody looks at them. The students look for the mark, maybe a little bit of feedback, and that's it. And that, I think, is because we've done quite a bad job in training students how to engage with that feedback. We haven't given them enough space to engage with it and to see how, even in traditional assessments, how the feedback they get carries forward into their coursework, into future assessments, into their professional life. And the way we've gone about trying to rectify that to a certain extent, again, is about signaling the importance of why it is they're doing the things that they're doing, giving them time to reflect on that, discuss why it's important, what aspects of the activity they've just done, how they connect up with their future plans, for example. If they want to go work in an NGO, they probably need to get their heads around policy. Okay, so we'll do some policy briefs. There's a great way to get students to be thinking in a more practical way about their assessments. But say a student does the policy brief, but they want to be going into academia. Well, so many of the skills that you cultivate when you're doing a policy brief are relevant to writing research abstracts, for example, or writing an op-ed for the conversation, or something like that. So again, if the students are aware of those skills, they're much more likely to be looking backwards and thinking, oh yeah, no, I got a 74 on that essay, but I recognize actually I could have gotten an 81, and I will for the next one. And even more importantly, the things I did well in that 74 will help me when I want to be an author, when I want to be a banker, when I want to be an economist, whatever it is that the student is trying to do. So as long as the students have that time and space to reflect and somebody to help guide that reflection, I think that that's really, really important.